but I feel, I don't know. I just, as far as what you would call the mainstream poetry, I mean, there's all different sorts of really edgy poetry being written as well. But as far as what's considered, I guess, what I would think is considered acceptable in polite company might not be what all my poems are like. However, many of my poems I think are, you know, perfectly just not. There's nothing offensive about them at all. But I don't know, and I don't write to offend people necessarily. Although I think some people maybe do need to be offended.
What do you think is the power of that?
I've always thought that when you use the body in you know, you reference certain anatomy in certain ways that make some people uncomfortable. I feel like being uncomfortable is a good place sometimes. It shakes people up, makes them think a little bit more, and hopefully doesn't just leave them feeling offended, but maybe asking questions. So maybe it plants a seed in their minds, so sometime later they will become a little more tolerant or open-minded, hopefully. I don't know if that's true or not. That's my hope.
Your poem, Daddy, which is appearing in your manuscript, which will be published by Exquisite Disarray, it focuses on the dynamics between a father-son relationship in a somewhat very stripped and I'd say almost impersonal tone. It's almost as if you don't really care about the uniqueness of the characters, but are merely hoping to recreate their more realistic elements. Some of your most noticeable work seems to do this stripping away of exclusivity, of cultural perceptions and prejudices, often tracking back to roots of sex or psychology. Do you agree with that statement? And if so, what is it that you feel that you're trying to communicate, and why do your poems find themselves within this realm?
I guess I pair away anything that seems added to me, and I guess I'm not that interested in character. I'm more interested in what people do, which maybe identifies a sense of character. But I don't know that I try to do that. Like I said before, I'm generally following the language, and so I think a lot of poets maybe do this. I don't know, but I feel like we're more kind of stumbling around in the dark as we write, and that we may come across something that it seems like it was very well thought out, it's challenging certain structures, or dealing with sex or psychology in a certain way, and I do feel like I am exploring those areas, but I don't feel like I set out to prove anything. Not like if I was writing an essay and I had my proofs. I don't feel like I'm doing that.
The concepts and scenarios presented in your poems are often very frank. In talking with Bill Kapinski about your work, he says that your poems contain little or no instructions to the reader as to how it's to be interpreted. The poems just happen. Your poems come as they are, raw and unadorned, and without the interpretive tags seen on so many contemporary poets. And to extrapolate on that, you talk about dropping acid or ejaculation without a pause to swallow, if you will. But you present these implications of frank scenarios without over-detailed explanation. A good example of this is A Brief History of Heavy Petting, in which your carefully designed implication of how sex evolved tells a story that acts as a vehicle for parallels in modern discourse. In crafting a poem, how much do you have the thought processes of the audience in mind, and what poetic strategies and devices do you employ to get your point across?
I try not to have an audience in mind, because I'm afraid that if I do, I'll start censoring myself. So, especially when I'm in early stages of a poem, I really never think about who might read this, because I feel that that's somewhat limiting. I think probably. Well, I won't speculate, but I was going to say I think maybe too many poets think about that, who might read this, and that might limit them in ways that aren't really helpful for poetry or for them, or for their audience, honestly. Because I feel like I said before, that it's our job to kind of push people a little bit, or sometimes to disturb them. And I also think that we need to comfort people too. I mean, we have many different roles.
What poem or couple of poems in this collection would you say best represent you as a poet, as a person, and why?
The poem Perdido Después de la Traducción, which is the only poem with any Spanish in it, represents me best. That's most of the poems I wouldn't consider in any sense autobiographical, although that one is probably the closest to one that is, and I think it encapsulates my sense of play with language, and my love of playing with language more than any of the other poems. I think it's a little bit more gentle of a poem than some of the others, and that's probably if you want to know what my true self is, that would be that. I don't, even though I feel like a lot of my poems are kind of harsh and a little bit, I don't know, austere in some ways. I don't really think that's my true personality, but that's just kind of where I artistically go to when I'm writing, I guess.
Here's sort of a philosophical question for you. It's a curveball. What would the world be like if everyone was a poet?
I would think there would be probably no skyscrapers. I think a life without poetry is somewhat, or life without some sort of art is more likely to tend towards maybe selfishness that can create harm. It's not so much what poets would do, but it's what they wouldn't do, I think. I guess for one thing, I feel like if everyone was writing poetry, they wouldn't have time to get into other mischief, perhaps. All the mischief in the stock market and things like that, because they just wouldn't be chasing after money. And not that money is not important, but not that a way to barter or something is not important. But I feel like in current corporate culture, money is seen as the gold standard, and human life becomes devalued.
In relation to your poetry itself, what is something that you feel you try to communicate, if there's something that you find you touch on often?
I hope I convey a true compassion for the human condition. I know that we all have different unique challenges in life, and that we have different viewpoints, formed by our upbringing and whatnot. And I don't want to be too harsh on anyone so I don't want to come across as judgmental. And I hope that my compassion can shine through, even if some of the poems maybe don't seem so. I also hope that my work might be inspirational to the young queer poets to come. That I know that there was poets that I read when I was younger, and I was like, wow, I can't believe someone was able to write that, or that you can write about this stuff, and hopefully that will be inspirational to someone else.
What is something you want everyone to know about you as a poet, as a person?
I would like people to know that this is all something you can do too. I just take it one day at a time. It's an exploration, and it's a joy. And I guess if you can find something in your lives too to bring that sense of play and wonder back that we had as children, that kind of slips away at a certain age. And even if you can bring it back momentarily, I think that's what poetry can do, or what music can do. So Timothy Lou sent in a little statement of advanced praise today, and he said this book is not for the squeamish. And I would say that's probably true for some of the poems. So if you're particularly squeamish, maybe skip poems like History, or skip poems like Daddy, or poems like that, and just or have someone who's not so squeamish to read it first, tell you which poems to read, and skip the rest if you'd rather not throw up or something like that.
Okay. Well, I think that's a good note to not throw up as often. Jeremy, thank you very much for your time.
Well, thank you, Elliot.